All right. I don't really know what to call the show here, but it's a Converge, You Fail Me, Redux special. Do you want to call it that?
Rich's World.
Yeah, we'll call it that too.
That's what you always wanted.
I'm here in beautiful Beverly, Massachusetts with Kurt Ballou and Jacob Bannon and Kurt's dog.
And Caleb.
Yes.
Mozzie Paws is better.
And
yes.
Mozzie.
And Mozzie. Yes, Mozzie is here. So we just wanted to talk about You Fail Me and what went into the redone version of it and some of the things that happened along the way. So let's talk about the original kind of recording. You guys cool with that? Cool.
Sure.
All right.
Yes.
All right. This was originally released in September 20th, 2004. Do you know that? I looked it up on Wikipedia before the show.
That?
Really?
Yes.
I knew it was 2004. I knew it was September.
We generally release records in September or October, it seems.
That seems to be the
internet would tell you that we actually do it on purpose, but we don't. It's just a thing that happens.
What does the internet think?
Well, the internet is actually our brain, but they say that we always do that, and that's because we plan it that way. And we technically plan it, but we don't plan on doing it that time of year. It just sort of happens.
I think
It's actually a terrible time of year for an American band to release a record because then it means you need to go on tour places where your van can spin out and roll over because of ice and things like that.
That's actually a good point.
That is true.
But maybe you guys like to record in the springtime. You're a spring recording band.
Yeah,
is that when you
young love with our new songs?
We're inspired by the sounds and sights of spring.
But so this was the first album that you guys recorded for Epitaph. Kurt, was this the first Converge recording in the God City in Salem?
It was, yeah.
Okay.
I think my studio in Salem had only been open for maybe 6 months or so at the time.
Yeah.
So I was still kind of learning the space, and actually the drums were recorded on the different part of the room that I usually record drums in now, just because I was still kind of learning that room and that environment. So yeah, it was definitely a new thing.
It wasn't the first recording that you did in Salem.
No, the first one that I did in Salem was Backstabbers Incorporated, Kamikaze Missions, which I believe was in October of 2003.
Okay.
And then this was, I don't remember exactly which month that You Fail Me was recorded, maybe May or June of 2004. So it wasn't too long after I opened the studio.
Okay, cool. So, you were still figuring out the room and things going on there.
Yeah.
So, would you say that had an impact on the recording? That maybe certain things you weren't happy with in the end? Absolutely.
It was really interesting going back and listening to the original tracks from that recording. They actually sounded, I don't want to pat myself on the back too much, but they actually sounded a lot better than I was expecting. We did a good job of capturing things, and I think we performed those songs really well. I recently had the opportunity to go back and listen to some of the Jane Doe tracks, and the isolated tracks on Jane Doe, and I think that we had actually come a long way as players in between Jane Doe and You Fail Me. It was an extremely busy time for the band, and we were playing a lot, practicing all the time, playing shows all the time. Aside from the period of time when I was building my studio where we were kind of on a brief hiatus, we were just playing a lot and developing as players and also as an ensemble during that time period. So there's actually kind of if you listen to the raw tracks, there's a huge improvement of our tightness and the fluidity of our playing between You Fail Me and Jane Doe. But yeah, so hearing back those tracks, I was really pleasantly surprised. And in terms of the sounds, they were maybe a bit different than the sounds that I'd be capturing today. And that's due in part to just my understanding of the room. I'm on my third mixing console at God City Salem now, so this was done 2 consoles ago. So the gear that was being used was quite a bit different than is now, but it was still it was high quality stuff for the most part. But access to guitar amps and snare drums and cymbals and that kind of stuff was different. But yeah, the big changed probably since then to the way that I would approach a Converge recording is with the positioning of the drums and the way in which I capture room mics in that studio.
Yeah. So do you want to talk about some of the things that you did differently on this one as opposed to the original recording, and some of the ways that you enhanced the overall sound of the album?
Well, so my big complaint about that record that I've always had is, right, so we recorded Jane Doe in a mix of the God City that was in Norwood, Mass, as well as, but most of it was tracked in 2 different studios in Q Division in Boston, and Matt Eller did most of the engineering for that, and Matt Eller did the mixing at Fort Apache, and on a big Neve 8068, classic rock mixing console, and that stuff all sounded great, and then for You Fail Me, it was the first one that we tracked. It was the first one that I tracked by myself. We tracked it in my new studio. Then Matt came up and mixed it in what was an unfamiliar environment to him on an unfamiliar mixing console, using tracks that I recorded instead of tracks that he recorded. And I think he did a great job with the original mix. But one of the challenges that we had, aside from just him getting acclimated to the room, was that we had a lot of power outages. There was some problem with the transformer in the street that provided power to the studio, and he would show up to work every day, and within half an hour or an hour of him starting work that day, the power would go out.
So it wasn't something that you guys could fix internally, in the studio. It was something that was happening outside on the street.
Yeah, so he had...
So you'd have to call the city or something?
Yeah, I mean, National Grid would be outside in front of the studio all day long, and it was I think at that point, I think it was, so maybe it was June, because it was we were getting brownouts. It was basically what was happening. Half the power, one leg of the power would go down, and things like that, and lights would be flickering, and some of the gear would be on, some would turn off. It was weird stuff, and they kept kind of patching it, and it would get them through the night, and then when things would heat up during the day and people would be cranking their AC, it would go out again. And eventually they ended up replacing the transformer. So, but, what ended up really happening is we booked Matt for a week, and he had that time allotted, and then he had other projects to do after that. But I think he ended up having to mix the record in about 3 days.
So you lost quite a bit of time.
Yeah.
And what was he originally supposed to? How long was he supposed to be there originally?
About a week.
Okay.
And he's the kind of person when I'm mixing, I generally I leave the console set up, and when I go from song number 1 to song number 2, I don't pull down the faders and bypass all the gear and then start over, whereas he's someone with more of a rock background, so he'll start from scratch with each song.
Oh, really?
So it made the mixing of that record really inconsistent. If you listen to the original version of it, it's really inconsistent from song to song, and there was some songs that turned out really awesome and other songs not as much. And we had to make up for that a lot in mastering. I mean, I don't fault Matt at all for it. He was working under, I don't want to say duress, but it wasn't ideal circumstances for him. I'm sure he would have preferred to do it at Fort Apache, which I think was actually closed by that point.
And I'm sorry, was this all recorded in the analog state, or were you actually...
We tracked drums and bass to tape and then transferred to Pro Tools.
So you were mixing in Pro Tools?
We were mixing out of Pro Tools, which is still what I do today. Where Pro Tools... There may be some plugins involved, but... the heavy lifting is all done with analog gear on an analog console, and faders and all that stuff. So basically, all the Pro Tools faders would be set at 0.
Okay.
And then the console does most of the work. So basically, treating the Pro Tools like a tape machine rather than
just the hard. You're recording onto the hard, or mixing from the hard drive, as opposed to a tape. Yeah,
it's not much of a mixing platform. I mean, I've become more comfortable with getting a little bit more digital in my mixes over the years, but at that point in time, that was, I want to say it was Pro Tools 7.
Yeah.
It was HD. It was whatever the first release of Pro Tools HD was, because I think I spent the entire recording budget for that record on a Pro Tools HD rig.
Yeah.
So that was the beginning of Pro Tools HD, and there wasn't sufficient bit depth in the summing architecture of Pro Tools back then, like before I think version 8, for really good in-the-box mixing. Like Cubase had it at the time, but like Pro Tools didn't have it yet.
Okay.
So I wouldn't have even been comfortable mixing in the box at that point. Not to mention I didn't really have the skill set for it. I didn't really have the skill set for mixing on a console yet, which is why we hired Matt to do it.
Yeah.
But then by the time
at the time, sorry, you were more comfortable mixing with the board as opposed to. Absolutely. But also, like, I think that my mixing chops in general were certainly like not up to the same caliber that Matt's were at the time. And then, but then by the time we did No Heroes, I felt more comfortable with my mixing ability, and I feel like I started to get that room kind of dialed in. So I was comfortable mixing No Heroes, and that was stressful for me, but I feel like I did a pretty good job. And then. So then now we had like No Heroes, which sounded like one thing, and then we had Jane Doe that sounded like another thing, but then You Fail Me didn't really fit in between the two. It was kind of a sonic departure, and my goal in remixing You Fail Me was to retain everything that I thought was great about the original, but then also try to make it fit more linearly between Jane Doe and No Heroes. Okay, yeah, that totally makes sense that you found almost the sound of the room, and you were more comfortable, once No Heroes, you started recording that, and that makes sense. So what sort of things did you do to You Fail Me that resulted in a remix and getting that new kind of sound to it?
Well, it being an analog mix, there wasn't like, I didn't have the original as a starting point.
Oh, okay.
I have the original tracks, but it's, it's not mixed in a computer, so it's not like I just could revise the original mix. It's really starting from scratch. And I certainly had the original mixes synced up with the mixes, the remixes that I was doing, so I could always like reference those and listen to them intently and try to figure out like what was good about these and what could use improvement. And I think mostly it was more just adding more or trying to convey a more of a sense of being there, more like three-dimensionality to things, particularly the drums. Matt wasn't a big fan of ambient mics on drums. Because the stuff is so fast, he had like a very direct and very kind of bright drum set. Excuse me. Whereas I tried to make the drums a bit more full frequencied, and just kind of ambient and more similar to the other records we've done. And
once you came finished that final mix, you went back to West Side for mastering.
Yeah.
Right? Was there anything that you wanted to hear in the final master? Anything that you would kind of giving notes to Alan to enhance the sound that way as well?
Well, doing Converge stuff with Alan is like, he gets it because he's done so much stuff with us. And one thing that's been important to me about Converge from a sonic standpoint over the course of all the albums we've done is, a sense of continuity. And using Alan, because he's mastered most of our records at this point, using him, I think, helps preserve a sense of continuity. He understands that, and he also mastered the original version of You Fail Me. So he still had all those things on file, so he could pull up that stuff and kind of compare and contrast the original. And so I asked him to approach the mastering the same way that I approached the remix. Like, hey, listen to these original masters, try to figure out what's good about this, and what could use improvement, and keep the original in your mind as you're doing this new master. Because I recognize that that this record means something to a lot of people, and it may be off-putting to those people to hear it in a new way. So I want it to feel, I don't want it to feel like it's totally new. I want it to feel just like an improved version of something familiar.
Yeah, I was going to say, you do get some backlash, I would say, sometimes when you remix or remaster an album.
I mean, this record is not so stylized in a mix process that I feel like that would be a problem. I think Jane Doe might be a harder thing to remix because the mix and the master is so stylized.
Yeah, and at this point, it's an iconic recording in the history of punk metal.
Don't get me wrong, I'd love to do it, and every time I hear that record, I'm like, oh, there's this thing and there's that thing, but I don't know if that'll ever happen.
It's a difficult decision that you'd have to make if you ever wanted to. Yeah, definitely. Speaking of the master too, Alan did a new vinyl master for this one. I know in recent times that at the time You Fail Me came out, vinyl was still selling just as we've always done vinyl, and it's always been a thing, but now it's even more in the forefront, and people are analyzing vinyl mixes and saying what's different about this that makes it better. Is there anything you can comment on the actual vinyl master that you might not know, because I know Alan did the master, but anything that was in this version of the record that wasn't done in the
versus
previous
the digital?
Yeah, anything different as far as that goes?
I can comment on how the CD, iTunes, and
there's
vinyl
mastered for iTunes too.
Of this particular release vary.
Yeah,
the mastered for iTunes version is more similar to the vinyl version than it is to the CD version. Apple has its own encoder for its own, was it AAC encoder?
AAC, yeah.
And it doesn't like super brick wall limited, mega loud type of mixes. And they recommend you using Soundcheck when playing back on a mastered for iTunes album. So there was a bit of experimentation done as to what the ideal sample rates and bit depths were to feed into Apple's AAC encoder to see what sounded best.
Okay.
And I actually don't remember what was settled upon, but there are varying approaches, and it was done not as an afterthought.
Okay, so I'd say I was in the conversation a little bit when this was happening, and the mastered for iTunes version was specifically important to this.
It is, yeah.
To this redone version.
One thing that I hate about Apple's Soundcheck feature is that it functions on a song by song basis and not on an album by album basis. Mm-hmm. So if you have an album like You Fail Me, which starts with a track called First Light, which is a sort of a quietish guitar intro that should be much quieter than the rest of the record. The mastered, if you have Soundcheck on, the mastered for iTunes version is going to jack up the version of First Light, and there's literally nothing we can do about it.
Almost like normalizing a track. Yeah.
It's idiotic. There's nothing we can do about it, unfortunately.
Is that? I don't even know if it's default on when you actually listen to it. I don't know.
I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I'm kind of taking a break from the whole Apple Music world right now while they figure some stuff out. So I haven't been playing audio back that way recently. But yeah, so there's that. And then when it comes to the vinyl master, there's two things that vinyl really doesn't like. One of it is panned bass. So, or panned low end, not so much bass guitar, but the bass guitar, the bass drum especially, because the groove in vinyl is essentially a V, right? So the left and right channel is either side of the V. So if you have a bass drum hit that's panned to the right, it'll actually cause the needle to skip out of the groove. So you want that stuff panned to the center. So what's done is called elliptical mastering. So basically they do some processing so that as you go further, deeper into the frequency spectrum, as it gets to low frequencies, those low frequencies get pushed towards the center. So your really low subtype stuff is totally in mono. So even if you had hard pan double bass, I don't know why you'd want to do that, but if you did, only that the high end of the bass drums would be panned and the low end of the bass drums would be centered for the vinyl version. You could get away with it on CD and not have any trouble. But a song like You Fail Me, for example, the title track, that has two bass guitars.
Oh, really?
And so I believe, aside from the intro to the song, the entire song has double the bass guitars, which are panned. I don't think they're hard pan, if I can remember correctly, but they are panned maybe 60-70% or so. But the low end from that bass on the vinyl master will be more centered than on the digital master, and that's just to allow you to cut the grooves deep enough for a loud vinyl master, and for it to not skip. So that's one thing that happens. The other thing that it doesn't like is any kind of square waves. So the needle should always be moving. So if you have like on a CD, you can get away with like a brick wall limited, like real square looking waveform, and it sounds subjectively fine. But on vinyl, that like square stuff means that just the needle's just riding out a flat surface on the bottom of the record. So you basically want the needle to always be moving. So you really try to avoid having like clipping the top of the waveforms. So the vinyl master is typically a lot more dynamic than the CD master is.
Okay, cool. Also on this version, there's the Wolves at My Door track. This was originally on the vinyl only with Deathwish.
I believe we treated it more like a bonus track.
Yes,
initially. You may shake my memory a little bit, but I'm pretty sure we just didn't really know where it could fit in the regular album version. We had a hard time figuring out a sequence with it, so I think we just sort of treated it as a bonus track. Also, at the time, remember Japanese titles, releases always wanted a bonus track, and I think we were looking at it to be that as well. Any more insight?
I remember Nate didn't like that song.
Weird.
No, but I mean, I think he was right. I think it's not as strong as the other material, probably, or maybe it was maybe it was because he didn't like it. It just, we didn't work on it very much, or I feel like at least the idea I had for it in my head didn't come through quite as strongly as some of the other songs did, and so it ended up in bonus land. Yeah.
I thought the track was very interesting, but I can definitely see where it might not fit in with the album as a whole.
It's also I believe it's the only song we ever wrote in that tuning.
Oh, really?
I can't remember exactly what it is, but I know the Promise Ring used it.
There you go. So that one is actually... Up. Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's the one song we tuned up for, not down.
Maybe that's why. Maybe it just kind of sounded bright and a little less dirgy than the rest of the album.
For sure.
So that song is actually going to be available on all of the formats now. So you can whatever format you end up getting.
It seems to matter less in hindsight when I listen to it now. It fits with the body of material. But I remember back then having a pretty strong opinion that it didn't as well.
Cool.
What was the original idea for the song that didn't come through, if you don't mind me asking?
It wasn't a specific idea. It was just more of a feel. Like, sometimes when you write songs, you just have you get really excited about what you're writing, and if your bandmates don't share your enthusiasm and contribute to it in a way with the same level of enthusiasm that you have, you just doesn't come together. I mean, a lot of my ideas don't come together. I mean, I have many famous riffs amongst my bandmates that
the riff bank
that they think are terrible, and that's just all part of writing songs.
Yeah, well, a lot of that has to do with hearing it in context too. Like sometimes, as a band, you're a collective thing, and you don't really all understand where a riff is going, and so we might hear it with different ears than Kurt is. Kurt might hear it a specific way, and we're just hearing it in a different language entirely. And sometimes during the writing process, it kind of materializes and becomes what was intended, and other times it veers off course because our opinions just steer it in a strange direction.
Yeah, and usually that collaboration makes things better than they were. So many of the songs we've written are so much better than I heard them in my head because of each member putting their take on it. But then once in a while something comes along that, I don't know, just doesn't come together the way that we hoped it would.
Yeah, totally. Anything else you want to touch on as far as the audio side of the album before we talk about a little bit about the packaging?
I don't think so.
I hear a lot more depth as far as instrumentation goes in some of the songs. I hear more guitars. The bass sound also sounds a little more full-bodied than it did on the previous mix of the record. And also it just might be what I'm listening to it on as well. Because back then I was probably listening to music on smaller speakers, but listening to test presses at home on my system at home, things sound much warmer, much more intense. I can hear xylophone more now. It sounds like.
But you're thinking of glockenspiel.
Oh, glockenspiel. Sorry about that. Yes, that high. Yeah. So I can hear. I guess I can hear some of the low end growl more, and I can hear some of the. It almost sounds like I can hear more guitars too. There's more separation.
Well, that's the difference between mixing something quickly in an unfamiliar environment versus taking a bit more time in a familiar environment. I had the opportunity to let the nuances of each instrument shine through a bit more. Whereas like the original, it's just there was an immediacy to it that was really cool, but it was also there wasn't time spent in the details.
That's interesting, like, going back and listening to your recordings, like, do you ever, in this one in particular, do you ever find something that you're just like, oh, I forgot I did that?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. It's like, oh, yeah, I forgot I did that riff this way, or this instrumentation this way. Or,
right. Because, the only time I listen to a Converge record is if we decide we're going to play a song live that we haven't played in a while, and I need to relearn it. I don't drive around, listening to my own band's record. And that would be... I once saw... driving around listening to...
I was a witness to this. I saw that. It was outside of a show in New York. He drove by.
In the Village.
Yeah, listening to...
that's got to be one of the most embarrassing things in the world, right? So, aside from that, no, it's just I can't listen to my own band without analyzing it. So I don't enjoy it.
Yeah, you're not listening to kind of bob your head in the car.
Yeah. So when I hear back stuff, I'm just like, whoa, that's slow, or wow, I forgot about that glockenspiel part, or there's a bunch of glockenspiel in the song Last Light that I forgot about.
Yeah.
In J and Do, it's wild how much stuff is in there that I completely forgot about. It's also crazy how differently we play those songs live. It just over the course of the many years having played songs live, they just evolve.
Yeah, I was going to say like a riff that you recorded might be played a little bit differently because you've just gotten used to playing it that way now. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you think when you record songs, they're a month, 2, 3, 6 months old, something like that.
Yeah,
whereas you play them and tour them over the years, and when we recorded stuff, there's just one of me, but I can play a lot of different guitar parts, and then when we're playing things live, I need to kind of find
that's a good point too.
A greatest hits version of that song to play live, and it takes on a different character, and maybe that character is a bit different than the way the song was mixed. And I hear that stuff more on Jane Doe than I do on You Fail Me, but yeah, for sure, it's definitely uncovering some interesting things. And then listening to those songs really analytically, I'm like, wow, we should have done that on a click track.
Yeah, tempo is something that always changes dramatically as a song evolves too in a live setting. We settle into certain live tempos that may be slower or faster than you hear a record, and it's just way more varied than you remember.
Yeah, and I think that's the interesting part of a live show. Hearing a song at a different tempo, you might be like, oh wow, that's really cool. I love the way they did it this time. Or sometimes it doesn't work. Or I think that's interesting.
It depends on the audience, though. People that are into hardcore metal and stuff, they appreciate live music, and they like to hear a band play live for real, whereas people who are more casual listeners of music, they want to go to a show, hear the album, and see the band.
Yeah.
They don't really want to hear what a band sounds like live.
That's actually a really good point too. Yeah, they just want a replication of the album.
Yeah, and that's why a lot of those bands, it's more about the production that they put on and their pyro and their all that stuff, and then they're playing to a lot of backing tracks and stuff, and that's cool too. That's putting on a show, and that's awesome, and that's not something we're able to do. So, but this there's a big difference between live recording or live performances and studio recordings, even in the hardcore world. There's a certain visual excitement that you get from watching a band live that you will never get from an album. So just try to take full advantage of whatever environment your music is being delivered to.
Cool.
Also, isn't this around the time you guys made the switch from 2 guitars to 1?
No, that was
That was more the release of the Jane album.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, the record release of for Jane Doe was Aaron Dahlbeck's last show with
Gotcha.
Converge.
But he recorded on Jane Doe.
A little
right?
bit, yeah.
So this is the first album recorded with just you?
Yes,
Cool.
but Aaron was also like, I think they were working on Give Blood. Bane was working on Give Blood at the same time as we were working on Jane Doe. So like Aaron was like really focused on the Bane record.
Gotcha.
But he was there for Jane Doe too.
Cool. I think we'll wrap up audio stuff. Do you want to talk about packaging, Jake?
Sure.
So when we first started talking about this release, when we're talking about how the audio is going to be remixed, remastered, you obviously wanted to give it a new visual kind of spin on it, right?
I want to give it a spin, but I also want to keep the integrity of the original intact, much like some of Kurt's opinions when it comes to recording goes. You don't want to completely detach your audience from the initial record. So it wasn't like I wanted to make a brand new fancy version of the record that had a different cover.
Yeah.
The original cover was, a negative, a white on black mixed media illustration, and I just simply made it a positive for this version. And also it allows us to potentially keep both versions available, and it's an easy way to visually differentiate both releases. They don't have the exact same cover. So when you say, I was thinking about the digital realm as well, when you're looking at something on Spotify or Apple Music or something like that, and you see a remastered version or a revisited version of a record, a lot of the times it's the same cover, and there's just some sort of type prompt that tells you, a subtle variance, between the two. But this allows both of them to exist within the same world and still be told apart fairly easily.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think in about another 10 or 15 years, we're going to do a surround version with a holographic hand.
I think that's a great idea.
We might be all listening to the record or visually looking at it on VR headsets. So those are the rage right now. So, you redid the CD version, the vinyl version.
Yes.
We did some interesting things with this one.
We did. We made some custom pieces for both the CD and the vinyl versions of the release that have never been done before.
We had to get a custom CAD made.
A custom CAD for both the CD and the vinyl version for the inner sleeve. And really, it's just a revamped version of the original CD wallet, but just simply larger. And that was never done in the vinyl version, before. So we had to make an insert that was essentially never made before. No one's ever tried to make it. And
we talked. Remember, we were kind of brainstorming for the album. We're just like, well, we don't want to just do a regular gatefold and make it, fancy. We want to do something cool, something interesting, something different.
And also, when you make something that's that large, that's essentially a quadruple gatefold. It can't be done on a singular piece of paper because no sheet-fed press is large enough to handle that. So it actually has to be printed in two parts and then glued and assembled together. So that took a lot of doing. I remember myself and yourself stared at the template, going, "Is this even right? Is this going to work?"
Yeah,
and it took a lot of work to get the final product. But I'm really happy with the results on both versions.
Yeah, so just to kind of people haven't seen it. Well, they've seen pictures of it online,
sort of, and it doesn't even show all of it. It's tough to photograph all of it.
So it's an 8-panel. Euro inner sleeve that we call it in the industry here,
right? But it's not even a Euro inner sleeve in the sense that it has part of a Euro inner sleeve,
attached to it.
Right?
So it opens up once as a gatefold, then opens up again, and then it reveals 4 panels on each side, so it's 8 panels total. And you actually, it's funny. I was opening it the other day. I was like, I need a desk. You can't just open it sitting down. You know what I mean? You have to spread it out on a table or something like that. And the vinyl itself is housed inside one of the panels, so just like a typical inner sleeve.
And that portion of the packaging was always the most interesting aspect in both the the original version and the new version to me, where the illustration itself is essentially interactive, where you have two sort of silhouetted sort of ghost style faces that work well together when you unfold it. They still continue to work. Oh, hello, Mozzie. And also there's an interesting juxtaposition between the typography and the living every day and dying every day lyrical portion of that as well. So you have a yin and yang. It's an interesting design exercise, and I'm just really happy that it came out as it did.
Yeah, I remember when I personally bought the CD when I was younger. I thought that was a really cool part of the packaging, and I'm glad that we highlighted that as part of the packaging in the new version. I thought that was really cool, and
I wanted to keep it close to the original. I didn't want to break too much. I just wanted to essentially enhance the experience for people.
So I guess someone's going to ask you. I'll be the asshole that asks you. What do you like, the white cover or the black cover better?
I like the white cover right now, but I like the black cover as well.
Yeah.
It's one and the same.
Yeah.
or the screen printed cover.
Or the screen printed.
Oh yeah, that was.
Don't forget.
We had because remember we had the extra vinyl and we did a screen printed cover. Mm-hmm. Highly sought after.
That's my favorite.
Yeah. And that actually came out wrong. Not the cover, but the vinyl. Was it that version that came out wrong?
Of the
original one? Wasn't it supposed to be something else? It wasn't actually supposed to be crosses.
Oh yeah, it wasn't. Trey would probably have a better.
But it came out. It worked. It worked fine.
The white
it wasn't actually the way we envisioned it, but it ended up working.
And we ended up with some extra.
That was actually when I started working here, that was the first record that I actually worked on, so that was cool.
And back then, the vinyl version of a record, it wasn't necessarily an afterthought, but it was secondary to a CD. CD packaging definitely took priority over anything when it came...
selling way more than the actual vinyl.
It was the listener experience, when it came to packaging was probably the most important for CD. So now, with vinyl taking precedent over that, I was afforded more opportunities to make something bigger and just simply crazier.
Yeah.
Technologically speaking, was there any advantage to doing it in the present versus 12 or 13 years ago?
That's interesting. I would say computer power definitely helps considerably. Where some of the machines that I would do design work on back in 2004 were quite archaic. I believe I made that original "You Fail Me" package on a blue and white G3.
Oh yeah.
Which at the time I bought secondhand from a strange Mac store in Alston that used to sell secondhand Macs. Remember that place?
Yeah. Are they not there anymore?
I have no idea.
I know the place.
Yeah, I used to buy stuff from them because I couldn't afford. There's before Apple stores were in every mall in the world, and that was pretty much it. Was there were Mac clones and things, and that was to me that was a high powered machine at the time, and also screen resolution. Working on larger monitors allows me to just simply look at things in a different way and catch little subtle things that you can't necessarily catch on the older machines.
Yeah, you could export a file and then go eat lunch and then come back and maybe it'd be done. I'm not really sure.
It was. I used to go on. I would go on dog walks while a file was writing or some sort of command was going on. Hoping that everything would go okay.
No, you mess something up, so you have to go back and re-export it again. It's
right. And, so now things are much more much faster, and just I won't say easier to do. They're just you have better tools.
Yeah, and you're also I know you always assemble at a higher DPI so you can use it for other things, right. But would you say now that you're kind of starting with the vinyl version and working backwards to the CD version almost, or you're kind of keeping both in mind when you're doing something?
Now, as a designer, I usually work, if I'm working on something that has multiple formats, I usually start with the vinyl and then work backwards, whereas prior I would work the other way around. Mm-hmm. So it just gives you a different outlook and different perspective on packaging and little things you can do and things like that. I wouldn't say CD is an afterthought now. It's just that it's less interesting from a design perspective for me, where like a vinyl version I can get a little crazy and do some wild stuff. CDs we try to be as cost effective as possible.
Yeah. And some people, the cover itself is, it's always been important, but it's so important now because some people will never even see the packaging, that because they'll listen to it on iTunes or Spotify forever, and they'll never even see the inside of a pack. They have no idea what it looks like.
Right. And, some people would, some people will argue that visuals are less important, but I consider them more important. It's just it has to be engaging in a different way.
I think that's about it. Anything else you want to mention about You Fail Me in general?
Not really. Yeah, not really. I'm just happy the way the whole project came out, and we don't have any plans to do this to the entire catalog or something like that.
Yeah.
And there were reasons to do it that were compelling, so we did.
Cool. So I guess we'll just do a little plug. It's June 17th. It's in stores.
Yes.
It'll be on all your favorite stores and online everywhere.
Yes.
So go give it a listen, and that wraps up this podcast.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you guys.
Thanks.